And I'm sure you would know that even within Reformist circles, within our own communities, the book Crisis and Consolidation is very famously discussed and shared widely as a form of questioning the normative orthodox account of what Shi'a theology is and how it developed. And the main argument of the book is that Shia theology that we know as today is very different to what it was during the times of the Imams. And basically the Shia theology has gone through successive periods of growth, alteration, and additions. And what was present at the time of the Imams initially is very different to what we have today. So things like, for example, the idea of belief in the Imams being infallible, belief in them having some kind of special knowledge of the unseen, some special kind of authority, or wilayat taqwiniya, and having some kind of supernatural abilities. These were all later additions that were added by other sects such as the Ghulat, or some of these beliefs were some stuff that the Shias themselves came to believe in gradually due to a crisis that occurred after the passing away of each Imam. So in response to 150 pages, more than 4,500 pages have been written as a response, as a form of academic critique. But the unfortunate part is that all of this research remains in Farsi and Arabic, and so to an English-speaking audience, they are not aware of this kind of advanced research and critiques of this book. It's very interesting that Hossein Modarressi has given several responses. The research that I would like to present to you today is something that I have worked on with my colleague Sayyid Ali Naki Zaidi, and this research was actually his idea in the first place. And it basically takes a very critical look at a famous work written in Western academia that looks at the historical perspective on the formation of 12-er doctrine. So the book in question that we wanted to look at is a very famous book which is called Crisis and Consolidation in the Formative Period of Shi'ite Islam by Professor Sayyid Hossein Modarressi Tabataba'i. The book was first written in English and printed by Princeton Press, and it was highly controversial, still is controversial, and the main argument of the book is that Shia theology that we know as today is very different to what it was during the times of the Imams. And basically the Shia theology has gone through successive periods of growth, alteration, and additions. And what was present at the time of the Imams initially is very different to what we have today. So things like, for example, the idea of belief in the Imams being infallible, belief in them having some kind of special knowledge of the unseen, some special kind of authority, or wilayat taqwiniya, and having some kind of supernatural abilities. These were all later additions that were added by other sects such as the Ghulat, or some of these beliefs were some stuff that the Shias themselves came to believe in gradually due to a crisis that occurred after the passing away of each Imam. So the argument is that at the passing away of each Imam, the Shia community were left in a crisis because they didn't know who the next Imam was. And successively these crises happened, and after each crisis, gradually the theology of the Shias changed. So this was like the overall general idea of the book. Again, it was originally written in English, and 2 years after that, an unofficial Farsi translation was published. But because it was unofficial, it wasn't really it didn't become really famous in the Hawza or within the Iranian circles. But 15 years after, a Farsi version, official Farsi translation was published, and since then it's been reprinted at least 8 times. And Hossein Modarressi himself as an introduction to the Farsi version. The reason why we wanted to look at this specific book is because of the number of responses that have been written against it, and critiques have written against it, because it had such a massive social spillover and so many effects that this book had. So for example, Professor Mohsin Kadivar famously came up with his idea of ulama al-abrar, basically the idea that the companions of the Imams only saw the Imams as pious scholars, and they didn't see them as infallible beings or divinely sent leaders. No, they were just considered as pious scholars. Now many people who critiqued Kadivar, they linked this to Hossein Modarressi's book, and they said, no, see, he has got his ideas from the book Crisis and Consolidation. Another example of a social spillover of this book is Akbar Ganji, who is an Iranian dissident who lives in the US and is a journalist, who is a very vocal critic of the Iranian government. So he has openly said that he doesn't accept the system of Wilayatul Faqih, and he says that this system is based on the belief of a living 12th Imam. And he openly says that based on the research that has been presented in the book Crisis and Consolidation of Hossein Modarressi, the 12th Imam doesn't exist, and this was just something that the Shias came up with later on because they were in a form of crisis. And there is no strong evidence to suggest that the 12th Imam was born. And I'm sure you would know that even within reformist circles, within our own communities, the book Crisis and Consolidation is very famously discussed and shared widely as a form of like questioning the normative orthodox account of what Shi'i theology is and how it developed. Now, in response to this, especially after the Farsi got translated into Farsi, there was a huge backlash, and a lot of like responses were written, academic critiques of the work. So in our research, what we did was, first we tried to gather as much as we can of how many like critiques were written against this book. So we found 64 works that were written against this book, ranging from articles to books to dissertations and to blog posts. So 64 different works, which amounts to more than 4,500 pages, which is interesting because the actual work of Modarressi, where he discusses these ideas, is only like 150 pages, the first half of the book. So in response to 150 pages, more than 4,500 pages have been written as a response, as a form of academic critique. But the unfortunate part is that all of this research remains in Farsi and Arabic, and so to an English-speaking audience, they are not aware of this kind of advanced research and critiques of this book. And they are only faced with the English book of Crisis and Consolidation, and they're not aware of the responses written against it. A lot of it has been written in Farsi, but a tiny bit has also been written in Arabic. I recently heard that last year in the month of Ramadan, Ayatollah Sistani's younger son, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir, he spent the whole month in his daily like classes or sessions critiquing this book. So that's one of the latest things that we have in Arabic, although the recordings and transcripts of those lessons have not yet been made official to the public. But a lot has been written in Farsi. So what was Hossein Modarressi's response to all these critiques? It's very interesting that Hossein Modarressi has given several responses. He's got a couple of letters where in correspondence with the Iranian historian Rasul Jafarian. So in that, they have a lot of back and forth, and at one point, Rasul Jafarian tells him that, look, you wrote this book, and there's been like a lot of like backlash, and it's controversial, and how many critiques are being written against it. So one thing that Hossein Modarressi has emphasized quite a few times in these letters, as well as in the introduction to the Persian translation, as well as in a letter that he wrote last year, because last year another book came out critiquing Crisis and Consolidation, so the critique is still going on, and in response to that, Hossein Modarressi mentions the same point, and that is that whatever I wrote in that book was based on the standards of Western academia, and he asks for his work to be looked at gracefully in that sense, that it's not based on the standards that we accept or the methodology that we accept. This is based on Western academic standards. And he said, all I tried to do was present a history of Shi'i theology that could be more defendable within Western circles and more acceptable. And then interestingly, he says that I didn't know that there would be such a kind of backlash and people would be misguided, because Rasul Jafarian tells him that the people, the laity, they read your book and they become really confused and they're getting misguided. So in response, he says that I'm very shocked to hear this, because I have like spent my life serving the Ahlul Bayt and I have deep and profound love for them, and I didn't expect such a response from people. I thought people would look at this book as a book of history. I didn't know people would take it as a book of theology. To the extent that he goes on to say is that at one point I considered, when I saw so many people are getting misguided by this book, I think it's better that I write a response to this book, a critique of this book, using a pseudonym, a fake name. But then for some reason he says that I didn't follow up that idea. But then I thought maybe I should encourage some of my other scholar friends to write critiques of this book, if this is the impact that it's having on society. Again, emphasizing that this was supposed to be just for Western academic standards. And in another letter, interestingly, he says that he complains that all these critiques that are being written about this book, the people who are writing these critiques, they forget the famous wise saying that says, "Al-batilu yamutu bitarki dhikrihi." Falsehood finishes or dies by you not mentioning it or you not discussing it. So he says by people discussing it, writing critiques, they just make it more popular. Whereas if they would not have done this, it would have just remained within Western academic circles and it would have died a natural death. But of course, the critics had to write their critiques because it was having an impact on the faith of people. So in terms of like the responses that we have seen, rather than just presenting a translation of the responses, what we attempted to do in our research was to try and categorize the different responses that have been written against the book and try and see if we can find some kind of like themes or groupings of these responses. So some of them that, just an example I would present over here, some responses are focused on methodological critique of the work. So they go and say, okay, what are these Western academic standards that you're using, which is a form of trying to judge theology by historical standards. So they go in depth and they critique the methodologies used by Hossein Modarressi in this book. Other critiques focus on the research flaws within the book. So for example, many works would try and pick out incorrect references within the book, where Modarressi has made an argument and brought a reference, but then they would say, okay, he's basing this on this evidence, but he's not referenced it properly. In fact, the reference is giving us something other than what he's trying to portray. Or cherry picking, for example, where if you have, let's say, 20 pieces of 20 narrations, Modarressi has only picked 2 or 3 that fit his narrative. Others, for example, have brought the question of incomplete quotations, and how if you look at a full hadith in its full context, you get something very different to what Hossein Modarressi is trying to portray. And others have said, for example, that there is a lack of engagement with counter evidence. Again, if 5 historical reports support a narrative that's being presented by Modarressi, there are 15 reports that go against it. But Modarressi does not challenge those other reports or give some kind of answer to that. Others have tried to show that one of Modarressi's main ideas is to say that some of these beliefs that we have are later additions. So for example, the belief in that the Imams had some kind of supernatural knowledge. Okay, let's say it's a later addition by the Ghulat. So these group of scholars, what they've tried to do is they have picked each and every part of 12 theology, and using a historical methodology, they've tried to and attempted to show that no, these beliefs existed within the Shia from the earliest days. So using a historical method, they're trying to show that you can't say these were later additions by the Ghulats. No, in the early days, we have historical evidence that the Shias did believe in this. So they take that route. Then others, for example, have focused on the aspect of the Ghulats and whether or not they had a significant impact on our hadith corpus. One of Modarressi's main arguments is that the hadith corpus has been tampered by the Ghulat. So they tried to show that historically speaking, no, the hadith corpus was transferred in a very secure way, and the Ghulat did not have such an effect or such a large impact that Modarressi is trying to show. It's interesting to note, by the way, that there are significant differences between the Farsi translation and the original English. In fact, Modarressi himself alerts to this point in the introduction, and he says that there's some stuff that I'm writing in the Farsi, especially in the footnotes, that I could not have said in the English because, again, it's written for a Western academic standard, and they would not accept that. So the Farsi has differences to the English. And in the end, I just want to present what has happened after these critiques have been written. So according to Hadi Girami, he says that with the translation of this book, Christ and Consolidation, the field of intellectual history has now been opened up in the Hawza. And scholars from within the Hawza are now saying that we need to now write our own intellectual history based on our own methodology. Otherwise, you'll get works like this. And so we need to produce local works using our standards. And then now there's a lot of theoretical debate and discussion going on about how will our methodologies compare with that of Western academia. How, for example, what are the limits of history and theology, and how do they work with each other? So this is an ongoing discussion that's happening right now on how are we going to write our own intellectual history. 2 scholars that I would like to just mention at the end who are very famous right now and working in this area. One is Sheikh Muhammad Taqi Subhani on the left. He has a nexus of institutes in Qom. He and his institute have released about 10 books, again, based on this idea of intellectual history, where they look at the different theological schools during each period and how they developed using our own standards. And then we have Dr. Pakchi, who is based in Tehran, Ahmed Pakchi. Him and his students have also tried to do something similar. So these 2 are figures right now who are famously working in this area and are considered to be at the forefront of intellectual history. And this is what I would have presented today about the recent developments that's happening in the Hawza after the critiques of Crisis and Consolidation.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
So now what I want to do